Hello, welcome to the final installment of spooky season. As you can see, how many of you am I fooling to think that that's a cauldron? This is going to be the darkest installment of this entire series as a heads up, which is why I told you it was the biggest one, as you can see from how long this video is. This was the only witch hat that I had, and I'm not going to buy any more because you just use what you have. This is not a strict history lesson, okay? We don't do that here. We talk about big issues, social commentary, and like all the other stuff that kind of like interweaves. Also, there's going to be some spoilers for Squid Game, but that's right at the end, and there is literally timestamps, so you don't have to have anything spoiled for you. I actually asked in my polls on YouTube and also on Instagram, so follow me on both, because Instagram chose like the motif that we're creating today, which I did a very poor job of, but I tried. And of course, you chose the title for this, as you always do here on YouTube as well. So please do subscribe. Do not play the drinking game of how many times I say witch, because seriously, if you're gonna do that, just drink water because it's a lot. Spoiler warning for all of these movies. I do need to put in very serious trigger warnings. Torture, drowning, hanging, burning, and lynching. And generally just society being god-awful. Anyway, welcome to the coven. Let's dive straight on into it, shall we? Chapter 1. How we got to witch hunts in the first place. Please consider this your TLDR. Men do not trust women getting power. Done. Finished. Boom. Video's over. So it all started with a book. No, not the Bible, though the Bible didn't help, like, at all. You may have heard of this book called Malleus Maleficarum, which definitely sounds like something Hermione Granger would be saying instead of me. In 1487, this book got published thanks to the wonders of printing press, and it almost became like a viral sensation. But then in 1490, a mere 3 years after the date it was actually published, the church banned it. What is a great way to make something actually more popular? To ban it. Just like with abstinence teaching, you know, it actually does way more harm than it does good. 14 editions of this book were actually reprinted by the date 1520. The most notorious witch hunts actually started around about 1450 and carried on until like the 1700s, so you've got around about like 300 years of not knowing who to trust and just living in constant fear, especially if you're a female, even more so if you are disabled in any way, or old, or single, my gosh, or a widow. Basically, if you're just not a liked person, it's kind of like a popularity contest, very Black Mirror-y. A full body count is also really hard to say because it could be anywhere between 40,000 to 60,000 people. The thing is that a lot of the victims were actually, how do you say, poor. And so people don't really care that much about like what happens to poor people, so they're just like, I don't know, could be thousands of them. They were a drain on society though, huh? Now before these witch trials happened, you did of course have the very classic case of Joan of Arc, who was burned alive as being deemed to be a witch. Now granted, it wasn't just for witchcraft that she was burnt for, but it was like politically motivated as well, but she was definitely accused of being a witch, which was a big part of like how she went the way that she did. But you know, we'll also be finding out throughout this whole video, a lot of things are actually very politically motivated, not necessarily about witchcraft. Pretty much all cultures have had a belief in magic or divination in their past, like globally, around the world, everyone. Lots of the time this was actually used for good and to like explain away things that couldn't really be explained. So you know, like when a massive disaster happens, when pestilence happens, when death happens, like an earthquake, then you know, you've got magic in your corner which you can blame things on, right? Sadly, most cultures actually seem to have witch hunts too. We are of course reflecting on like the most notorious, because of course this is the most well documented with the most theses and papers and studies done about it, because hey, this happened in the Western world. But white magic was incredibly common, so it's like, you know, incantations, herbs, stones, like that sort of stuff to like help people get better, like all that sort of stuff. Like that's typically more the vibe of like what was happening in a lot of places. I am simplifying. But these healing enchantments are actually a pretty big thing around poorer rural communities around like Europe. But that doesn't really serve God though, does it? And especially during this time when they're trying to convert everybody to Catholicism, or the one beginning with P, which I'm totally forgetting. And this stuff was cheap, you know, it's what you did to like help out your neighbors and stuff. And you didn't really pay taxes for it. Like, people couldn't really benefit from this except for in your own little community there. So it's like, we need to stamp this out. This is against God. And plus, this is what the poor people were doing. It's the same as knowing 2 languages or avoiding tax. It's only classy if you're rich to do that. Anyone can be a witch. However, People targeted tended to actually be women, more because in order to become a real witch, at least back then, you had to consummate with the devil. So even like, this is why when the men were actually found and like confessed under like the terrible conditions that they were kept in, like the torture and everything, even if they crumbled under all of that pressure and stuff, they would still say, I never slept with the devil though. Which is why it tended to actually focus on women. Generally understood that during these big witch hunts, like it kind of came in like two stages. So the first was against heresy and the second was as a form of control of the masses. And when you have people policing each other, like, you made it. Now, a really huge factor, because there were a number of things that actually led up to this, so we're just going to dive a little bit back into the past now. There were a lot of women that were getting married later, or, you know, staying single. And there was a lot of war, a lot of famine, and also there's this thing called the Little Ice Age, which is not as cute as it sounds. It's actually like had huge impacts for the way that society has developed. But the thing is, what happens with so many single women? They have other single women as friends. They talk. They learn things together. Their parents can't afford dowries, so they remain single for longer, like to the age of 27 getting married, which was considered to be pretty old back then. And sometimes becoming more than friends with other women. Almost like they were becoming empowered. Oh no, we can't have that. Then we've got the delightful people like King James VI of Scotland. Because of one key reason, his wife not being able to make the passage across the ocean to come to him was blamed on witches, and all of this started then, so he decided to write a nice little book for himself, didn't he? Called Demonology. King James VI was the reason that all of this actually began in England. Which is, well, Scotland to England, the UK. So he famously noted that experience daily proves how loath they are to confess without torture. So funny that, given just how barbaric the torture actually was. There were things like hand clamps, head clamps, where they would tie a rope around your head and neck and basically crush your skull to help you confess. When I said help you confess, I mean lie to get out of being tortured. They would starve you, they would keep you awake for days on end, like genuine torture. And then they would do the water test. You know, the famous one where they, if they float, like, yeah, they would do that, even though that wasn't actually legal. And yes, by the way, Monty Python was right with that sketch, so. That's the Holy Grail, in case any of you are wondering. It's probably my favourite one. Now, you may or may not have heard about this gentleman called Matthew Hopkins. Right piece of work he was. He was just this young fellow with big ambitions, stars in his eyes, and just really wanted to watch the world burn. So he saw all of these things starting to build up. It's like, he was a nobody, so you have to build credibility. And in order to build credibility, you have to convict a witch. Please check out the documentary on Netflix right now. It's called Witches: A Century of Murder. It's 2 episodes long. It's like watching a movie. It's hard going, but it's good. So this actually became a business for him, a very lucrative one at that. So he was this witch finder, and he went from town to town, something which he wasn't meant to do, so that was actually illegal, making people pay exorbitant amounts in tax in order to kill their own people. Oh no, sorry, kill the witches in their town. But it's actually his work, the particular book, The Discovery of Witches, that got this dragged over to America as well. Now, the very funny thing is, this same book had the complete opposite effect of him in the UK. It was actually his undoing. Because the thing is that he had some opposition, right? And so people were saying, do not believe this person. Like, people of the church were saying, this is all a lie, we shouldn't be doing this, like, there's no witches, there's no any of this stuff, like, just obey the word of the Lord and you'll be fine. Big old thing about it. So in this book, he goes into saying, like, all of, like, their claims against him, and the way that he refutes it is by lying. Literally in this book, everything he wrote was a lie, basically. Like, he fudged the numbers, he fudged everything, and just was like, well, I don't technically torture them, I don't technically do that. He was fully torturing them. Like, you know that whole water thing? He was doing that. Oh, but also, once that book came out, like, his work just went down in the UK, and then he died shortly thereafter. What a loss. I know people are like, oh, don't ever revel in someone's death. He was a terrible person. But of course witch hunting didn't actually die there. No, no, no. It carried on for like another 100 years in the UK, and then of course everything kicked off in America thanks to him. It was in like, so 1647 was where the first witch hunting stuff actually happened in America. And it's down to that boomer joke, you know, where like the husband and wife hate each other just that much. They both accused each other of being a witch. So that's how everything started in Massachusetts. Everything just got worse from there, and everybody knows about the Salem witch trials, which actually only took place over the course of 1 year. I thought it was way longer because of how much of a deal, like big deal was made out of it. Not trying to diminish like the suffering that happened. I'm just saying like, wow, I always thought it was like this huge thing, but it's actually not like that lengthy. There were 200 convictions over that course of time, just in Salem and like a small surrounding area. Like, that's huge. How many witches do you think you live near? And there is this thing that is the most telling, because there was an act in 1735 made in America which continued to actually be used to target spiritualists and gypsies. Now, that's probably not the right term. I'm just using it because that's kind of like the way it's stated by this law thing, so yeah, just noting that. That act only got repealed in 1951, so that act was specifically targeting a wide number of people across America. Fast forward to today, and witch hunting is still happening. Now, this is something that I didn't know until I started working on this video, and honestly I was shocked and horrified to find out about this, which also makes the connections I was already making that much darker because it's still happening. The thing that's the most concerning to me is the fact that the body count from the victims today far exceeds what happened over like those 300-400 years where we were at the height of the witch hunts. So there is only one country in the world where witchcraft is legally punishable by death by law, and that's in Saudi Arabia. Most of the people that are targeted in the areas that this does happen are women, children, the elderly, people with disease, HIV positive people, you know, kind of like the same way it was in history, because yes, children were also targeted in the past as well. I'm just going to voice over this bit because it just, ugh, I can't. So sadly, in some parts of India, it's specifically targeting women to settle scores, punish her for not accepting sexual advances or grabbing land. The district where premium mica is sourced from in the world, Jharkhand, which is a video I've already done about mica, this and other villages in India is where witch hunts happen. The areas of the world where this still happens is villages in India, sub-Saharan Africa, some parts of South Central Asia, like Nepal in particular for example, Papua New Guinea, and as mentioned before, Saudi Arabia. They typically occur where people are impoverished and struggling with low education levels, and it's incredibly hard for the accused to get help or escape due to lack of funds and education too. I don't really want to talk about exactly what happens to these poor people, but honestly I would argue it's actually worse than the past in some cases, because the voyeurism and sadism is on a whole other level than what it already was. Because it is still so prevalent today, the killing of people is a form of control, a way of stealing resources or land, basically a way to make people compliant and to kill off the quote-unquote unwanted. There's a lot of ageism, sexism, ableism thrown in there too, along with incorrect religious authority. And if you're not regarded as a liked person, much like the same throughout history, you're vulnerable to being accused of being a witch. Honestly, this has made me feel really uncomfortable, because it's like we've been able to reclaim the label and have it mean something of empowerment as opposed to a label of death. I mean, like, to me, as I'm sure many of you, representation of a witch is someone that is empowered and connected to the earth, possibly with a good sisterhood. It's all of those places around the world. It's the opposite. It's an inescapable label of shame and death. I need a minute. Chapter 2. Witches in Media. Now, we've talked about the incredibly grim reality, so I'm just gonna lighten the mood a little bit, because I definitely need it too. Like, my nightmares are bad enough, especially since looking into stuff for this video, my goodness. So let's have some fun now, shall we? The image that pops into my mind is Samantha from Bewitched and Sabrina the Teenage Witch, but that's because I'm a cool 90s kid, you know. Witches are actually almost overrepresented in media and writing. Not always in the best of ways though. Let's not forget, they are very similar to fairies. Now, we did touch on this in the fairies video if you haven't seen it already. Whilst fairies got made softer and more feminine, witches were strictly evil. Like, there's a scant few, like Glinda the Good Witch, which is only thanks to the Wizard of Oz, but that's basically it. Before then, witches really were evil. Therefore, everybody's demise. Rapunzel, witch. Hansel and Gretel, witch. The Little Mermaid, witch. Snow White, witch. And yes, Disney did have a heavy hand in like colouring people's perception of witches and making them into this very anti-Semitic look, but again, I've talked about that in another video where we've talked about Disney. Now, remember when I talked about Maleficent technically being a fairy? Well, she's branded as a witch though, because it just wouldn't make marketing sense to have like this sort of conflicting message that people can be good and bad, fairies can be good and bad, like there's a little evil in all of us. No, that's too nuanced for marketing. Same as in the Winx Club, the witches are bad in the Winx Club. Despite them working together sometimes, they're still bad. Basically, there's two camps that witches fall into. Can you guess what the first one is? The sexualized witch, who is gaining her powers as she reaches sexual maturity, which is a phrase I never want to have to say again. And then you have the bitter old hag. And then Agatha. I'm putting Agatha aside because I love that theme too. It's been Agatha all along. Seriously, if you're ever feeling down, just listen to that song and you'll feel happy once again. Of course, this leads into the stereotype of women, ageism, and all the other tropes that we're very well aware of, right? But again, this is how they're portrayed in media and in writing. Now, who is it again that typically controls all of that? I could have sworn there was one kind of person that was writing down the fairy tales that had been spoken from woman to woman. Oh yeah, that's right, it was men, wasn't it? Yep. Let's have a look at one stereotype. So you've got Roald Dahl's The Witches. Now, including a very anti-Semitic view because, hey, that was him, which sucks because I still love Matilda. I think that's such a lovely story and it really sucks. So you've got Madame Mim, Lamia and her sisters from Stardust falling into the old woman trope again. And of course with Lamia clinging to youth. Miss Price from Bedknobs and Broomsticks fought the Nazis though, so honestly there's some justice here. Even though she's only really old by Hollywood standards, she's not actually old. And then, you've got Debbie Reynolds playing Aggie in Halloween Town, who turns the old hag trope just on its head. Honestly, I love Debbie Reynolds so much, like ever since watching her in Singing in the Rain. She's a delight of a person, and if you didn't know, she's the mother of the late Carrie Fisher as well. So the 1940s to the 1970s had a very interesting turn with witches. They started to become incorporated into quote-unquote the real world in media. Now please also remember that law that was very much in place until 1951, so anything that came up before then, hoo-hoo, risky. But you know, people were more than happy like fantasizing about witches. Now you've also got to remember that dreaded Hays Code that just like ruined everything fun. Ugh, seriously. But there are a couple of overlooked movies from that time that if you are into the whole witchy thing, or you just want to have something different to watch this Halloween, because these are like wildly influential. First off, you've got I Married a Witch, which inspired Bewitched, the amazing show that it was, with the stunning Veronica Lake. Like honestly, she is the living depiction of nonchalant sultriness. Like that's just Veronica Lake. She's stunning. You should also check her out in Sullivan's Travels. That's a really good movie too. And also the movie Bell, Book and Candle, which came out in the 50s. So in that you had Kim Novak, who in Bridget Jones's words was a wanton sex goddess. And this movie is actually set at Christmas time, which is way more up my alley because I love Christmas. It's my favourite time of year. I will, of course, in a pinned comment, there's going to be all of the movies about witches that you should go and check out, which you can add to. There's going to be nothing to do with horror in there though because I can't handle it. You've got another feminine resurgence that happened in the 1990s, of course, and with that come the witches. The Craft, Charmed, Buffy, Sabrina again. Now I'm also going to count The Witches of Eastwick here, even though that came out in 1987, and even though that does involve the devil, it's definitely way more about like female empowerment than it is about like just succumbing to him because, spoiler alert, like they defeat him, or at least make him go the hell away. And we can't forget about practical magic, of course, as well. Now the real bond in that movie is actually between the sisters Gillian and Sally. The men really are more accessories to the plot there. And then of course like you've got the classic Sanderson sisters in Hocus Pocus, which really does fall into like the tropes of witches anyway. And then you have the representation that most of you will have thought of when I said the word witches, which is people like Hermione Granger and Hogwarts. Now I did hear someone actually say that Hogwarts is like the gentrified version of witchcraft, like the version of private school where it's very elitist and classist, even though witchcraft isn't actually meant to be witchcraft. It's meant to just be something that you learn like from generation to generation, like informally. They're like, no, we're making a whole institution out of this. I'm sorry, I'm not a mega fan of it. Like, look, My dedication to you is I took the quiz and I'm a Hufflepuff, okay? Like, I don't... What does that mean? I don't know. Another resurgence of witches arguably happened in 2016 with that dreadful election that happened in America. And that again got very much reflected in our media with a whole bunch of reboots this time though, because we're living in the era of reboots. Except for the movie The Love Witch, which is effectively an embodiment of men's fears and the power of women's intuition. If you have any recommendations for an amazing fine tip eyeliner, please let me know. Also, one more thing about The Love Witch, it's beautifully done, by the way. Now, also in the fairies video, I did mention that a lot of like the quote-unquote spirits were based on what was deemed to be quote-unquote savage. Because there's nothing quite like racism and appropriation to go around telling quote-unquote stories, is there? There's no denying there is an excessive amount of pretty white women representing witches everywhere. You can probably count something in Pirates of the Caribbean, same as some voodoo, and even in terms of heteronormativity. Is that even a word? There was one show that was in the 90s where it actually had a lesbian couple, which was of course Buffy, like we all know that. And then in the 2000s you had True Blood, then you've got the Charmed reboot, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the new one, and Fort Salem. But really like witches that are BIPOC, fat, old, or have any sort of disability, much like with most media in any case, very much underrepresented, even though, like I said at the very start, magic has been something that every single culture around the world has actually had in their history. So it's very whitewashed in media. Chapter 3. Women are reclaiming the label. If you're going to be evil together. I love that quote from this interview. Oh my gosh, the interview is really funny. I'm gonna do a voiceover for this bit because I clearly cannot do my eyeliner and this at the same time. People practice witchcraft to this day, and it's not centered on following like the wants of the devil or anything. It's actually far more about female agency. Now look, I do not practice any witchcraft and I'm not a witch, but I appreciate and identify with a lot of what they stand for. Now, I'm not gonna start breaking up covens or burning people. Like, seriously, they're not really doing anyone harm. And I think that a lot of female identifying people in the LGBTQIA+ community have actually really come into a greater appreciation of witches, and the ties with feminism are really obvious as well. Like with Sabrina in the 90s with a renewed interest in feminism. Yes, by the way, I would love to do a video on the Spice Girls. If you want, let me know. The 70s also had a witching resurgence, and the thing you'll commonly find is that people are looking for alternative ways in life in times of strife, and which also tend to align with feminist movements. To be a witch today, you don't have to follow Wicca, you don't have to follow paganism. You can honestly just self-identify as a witch. Like, there are many varieties of witches, and you've even got the eclectic witch, which takes inspiration from like different kinds of witches everywhere. But of course there are people just jumping on the bandwagon for like the cool witchy aesthetic, which you could say that I'm doing right now as we're doing like a Halloween costume sort of thing. I will link a website for you for like a beginner's guide which covers like everything pretty in depth. There's like your starting points along with books to like go through like that. This website is really good. Now, this is obviously not a one-size-fits-all approach, which is way more inclusive as well, because you can be a self-identifying witch, but there's a difference between being that and being a real practicing witch, because there are actually rituals involved, whether you're pagan or Wiccan or other. Again, all of this is from an outsider's perspective. Like, there's YouTube channels dedicated to this, there's books about it, there's Instagram about it, there's everything about it, okay? Now, I also really want to clear up a rumor right now, because you know how we've seen all those like tweets, because I've definitely seen them, witches are not the reason that we cannot have pockets. I thought it because I saw it in a tweet, and it's like, gotta be more critical than that. So of course, I looked into it, and it's actually not thanks to that. It's actually because of this lovely little thing called the Industrial Revolution, which we did talk about in the fairies video, and because of slimmer silhouettes, and yes, the patriarchy as well, which is one of the reasons why the suffragette suits that women wore, like, they boasted 6 whole pockets. Like, they were like, we are not here for this life where you're trying to stop us from hiding our secret letters from our lovers, because that's what you could do with your pockets in the past. You didn't carry around curses and hexes in your pockets, you just carried around your own things. But that made you independent and less reliant on men. That's why they went. Honestly, when it comes to modern day witches, I count this as a female empowerment movement, an inclusive LGBTQIA+ accessible movement. It's about friendship, it's about learning, it's about empowerment, it's about like doing things for yourself, which is something that women have been shunned away from doing for such a long time. So like personally, I don't really see anything all that wrong with it. Like obviously being vegan, I'm like, ooh, I'm seeing some mouse bones using some of these spells. Not really here for that, but there are vegan witches out there as well. As we know, MLM companies, those disgusting, I can't legally say this, but pyramid schemes, they seem to be actually catching on to this movement. So I just want to warn you in particular, there is this dreadful company called doTERRA. You know, the ones with the essential oils and the murder? Yeah, it's them. They seem to be trying to infiltrate like groups in order to actually sell on their essential oil wares, because you tend to use them in a lot of spells. I just want to have this as like a bit of a warning. There are some sneaky people, because you know how in like 2014 you had like all of the boss babe stuff, which some people still sadly have fallen for. There's nothing quite like a hollow boss babe chant to like really stir up that capitalism cool within us all, hey? My big concern here, which is the same as with cottagecore like I talked about before, is the fact that capitalism is just like sinking its dirty claws into it. And of course you get nefarious people trying to just sell you whatever the hell they want. You've just got a whole bunch of people trying to take advantage of people that are just looking for ways to empower themselves. Whether that's through manifestation, spells, crystals, like whatever. Witch subscription boxes are already a thing as well, which I was not aware of. There's actually quite a few of them. I'm obviously not telling you to like not go buying the things like for the aesthetic, for like if you want to get your crystals, whatever. If you want to support small business, like, or whatever, like you do what you want with your money. I'm just a little bit concerned with how commodified it seems to have been getting over the past couple of years, when realistically like taking part in witchcraft in the past, it was actually a very low bar. Like you didn't have to have all these many things in order to be able to be a witch. So it's just one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about with capitalism, of course, thinking it's cool and then being like, oh, we can make some money off this. It's like, could you not? And of course, like I keep mentioning, the roots of witchcraft really are many and varied and global as well. But you still have an overrepresentation of pretty skinny white people. And sometimes you get people just taking something from a culture that's significant to them and just saying like, oh, this is the vibe. And it's like, it's just appropriation of something that's actually significant to a culture. And so that's why I'm a little bit apprehensive around what some people are doing. Not saying everyone's doing. Lashes time, and we'll be back. The cats have woken up and decided that now is the time for like chaos and mischief, so I'm sorry. Chapter 4, why I worry for the future. So let's put on my lip liner and have a chat. So the reason why I worry about the future is the instability that caused the witch hunts to begin with. Anthropologists will know more about this than me. Obviously I'm oversimplifying, as most YouTubers do. The time when witch crazes start to rise was where disasters, uncertainty and pestilence were happening. What are we coming up to now? A climate crisis, which none of our recent ancestors have ever had to deal with? Oh yeah! The ramifications of which will disproportionately affect the poor and people deemed on the quote-unquote outskirts of life. Pixie, please stop playing with that toy right now. I have mentioned before quite a few times that I'm quite worried for the future. Pixie, I'm going to take that toy away. Oh my god. I sadly see a future of people watching screens as people die and are swept away, as people starve to death because of climate change. Like, not that it hasn't already been happening, mind you. I mean on a more extreme scale, as things just progressively get scary and worse for everybody. But like I said before, disproportionately affecting the poor. And of course, like, you've got to think about acidification, eutrophication, and big companies just taking water away from people that desperately need it. Nestle. I'm also very concerned about criticism being silenced, because I've got friends and also I follow influencers who can no longer say the word men on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. Women you can say, men you cannot. And so that's where I get very worried. Now this is also happening on dating apps. Like, there is a account I follow called Sari Tales, I think that's how you say it, and she shares her dating life story and like the terrible things and creates art from it and stuff. It's very, if you're ever in a salty mood, go check it out. Because the thing is that they repeatedly get reported for literally no reason, and they get attacked all the time but cannot do anything about it, and so they get blocked by the dating apps. and people have their accounts deleted. So effectively this is really targeting and silencing women already, and this is not in places of the world that you might think it happens because it's just the culture there or whatever other racist stereotype you're putting in place here. This is happening in Aotearoa, New Zealand here, Australia, UK and the USA. So 4 places where everyone's meant to be free to speak their minds, where it's like this is already happening, targeting women now. How are victims meant to be heard when their voice is being taken away? So my concern is kind of threefold. One, people becoming so desensitized to this that they don't care, which I already am seeing happen. 2, people turning on each other in order to get ahead and or survive. Of course, missing the biggest point, which is 3, the manipulation and exploitation from the top. So this is not like a big farmer is out to get you kind of thing. No, this is actually just realizing like how few companies control the ways that we not only get information but also share information and communicate. So with such a small amount of people controlling these channels, it's rife for manipulation and silencing. And of course these channels can definitely be making an example of people that do wrong by what they don't want to happen, you know, whether it's critique or whatever. You can of course try and link this in with cancel culture and all that other garbage, but like really that's accountability culture, and I would honestly be arguing that accountability culture is targeting people that are definitely making transgressions like racist remarks, homophobic remarks and whatever, so being held accountable. And I always say that people can change, learn and grow and stuff, but it's missing out a huge portion of the people that are actually doing the wrongdoing, because they are in the shadows in the background, like just pulling the strings from behind a facade, because they don't go saying anything. Like the richest people in the world are silent, unless you're Jeff Bezos and then you're just a megalomaniac. These people purposefully keep out of the spotlight unless someone like John Oliver does a video on them and like make sure that everyone's aware of this stuff. But still, like, we're relying on one white man effectively to do this. And then people will just say like, oh, the rich get away with everything, even murder. They do. Even with Squid Game. Please go to this timestamp if you don't want things spoiled. There's still people confused over who the true villain of Squid Game is, and it's like, it's capitalism. Oh my god, it's capitalism. Like, what the plain and simple, the old man represents it, same as the VIPs do. The people that are playing the game are pawns, same as the people that are the soldiers. Who's actually controlling them? Because as we can see, the soldiers are being controlled and heavily monitored as well. So actually the guards could be just as broke as the other people, but hey, they've got a roof over their heads now, you know? There is this whole thing with everyone pointing fingers at all the different players being like, they're a bad person, they're a bad person, does everyone have to be a good person in order to be able to deserve to live? Or do they just have to be rich? People are flawed, okay, and the rich people were happily just going on living their lives because they could buy their way out of it. Oh my god. No one who would win Squid Game would be a good person because you had to kill other people in order to be able to do it. I know she's your favourite, but even her, she's done some bad things too. She was my favourite as well. Not even Jihoon. And Sungwon was not the enemy. He just played the game that everyone's meant to be playing. The real villain is capitalism and what it makes people do, how it makes people act, how it makes you turn on each other, which is exactly what people are doing with this whole argument. So it's just proving all of the points. Because who's really in control? It's the old man that was so bored that he decided to play death games. And that's my biggest problem with the ending of it, because it buys into that stupid adage that money can't buy happiness, with his explanation of it, and still placing that bet, and then Jihoon actually not going to save the person. So I'm very frustrated with that ending. He still abandoned his daughter. He literally left an old woman with this child straight away. They didn't know each other. He's just like, I can't take care of you. I can't take care of you. You can just take care of each other. I gave you money. I'm just doing the same thing as what rich people do and throw money at a problem. Ta-da! Everything's solved. No one's a good person. Honestly, I'm just more frustrated by the takes on this than anything. Just listen to the writer and director, okay? Welcome back, everyone. My rant is now over. If you stuck around for all of it, welcome to the conversations I have with my husband. The most common thread throughout history is the fact that women and the vulnerable, the elderly, the disabled, BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, they're the ones that actually get marginalized and attacked. I did make a whole video about ageism, which I really want you to watch if you haven't seen it already. It's probably the most important video that I've actually made, but I know that a lot of you actually subscribed to me like way after that actually came out, so please go check it out. It will be in the end card as well. And of course, everything that I've said is coming from someone that would definitely be accused of being a witch. My gosh. Very well aware of that fact. But like, I don't even have cool magical powers. I'm just opinionated. Riddle me this. What was the thing that you were most jealous of that you saw witches do in media? Because for me, it definitely was seeing Sabrina able to just change her clothes whenever she wanted, just by pointing. As a child, as someone that grew up with not much, I was like, wow, oh my gosh, amazing. And does it also mean that there wouldn't be any exploitation in the making of them because it's literally magic? If so, we should all be witches. You know what to do. Leave the witch and the black cat emoji. I just think it's perfectly fitting for this. I hope that you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, of course. I would love to continue this discussion. I'm not a practicing witch myself, so I may have gotten things wrong. If I ever do get things wrong, always feel free to correct me, seriously. Now, I'll see you next week for the video on Marilyn. It's going to be a very big one. How many times did I say witch? And which witch were you counting? Are you feeling hydrated yet? Thank you, lovelies. I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye. The pink and orange paper is from Castor Black from my nail polish. And that paper, the burgundy stuff, is from my Clarity Cosmetics order. Never throw away your trash. You can always reuse like packaging materials, whether it's to package stuff up or it's to, like, I don't know, decorate for Halloween poorly. I try and use what I already have in the house. So there you go. Ignore this stick the whole time. I thought the trick and treat sign was cool because I want kids to come to this house because I'm a witch. No, actually, I've already bought a Halloween stuff for them, so I just want them to have a good time. Anyway, I bewitch you. Does that theme tune live in anyone else's head rent-free? Because it absolutely does for me. Same as the Sabrina the Teenage Witch one, actually. Like, the things you're exposed to when you're a child, they just stick. Now, we've talked about the incredible... Oh my god, I can't say that word. Quite a few times. It was Agatha all along.